because I am a native Nebraskan, and that's really the only place I've ever lived or gone to school or anything is in Nebraska, I think Nebraska is steeped in everything that I do. And I think it's such a part of me that I don't really realize how influential it is in my writing. But as you think about my titles, my first title, today I'm going fishing with my dad. My father and grandfather worked for the state fish hatchery in Valentine. And then, like I said, we moved to Ponca. My dad worked for the state of Nebraska, and at Ponca he was the assistant superintendent at Ponca State Park, and of course lots of fishing there, and now I live in Fremont, lots of fishing at the state lakes. So obviously that Nebraska fishing games park background has a lot to do with it. My stories dealing with Midwest. Everything that I write, Effys Image, in my head, I'm picturing Ponca, Nebraska, if we're there. I think everything that I write is so influenced by that that I can't separate that out. I mean, I don't think that I necessarily write about Nebraska, and yet, of course, in my head, every story is set in Nebraska. So. I have lots of writing mentors, some alive, some not alive. My first writing mentor was Laura Ingalls Wilder. I think she probably was a writing mentor to lots and lots of folks. But because I grew up 2 miles from the South Dakota border, she was kind of, when I was growing up and went to country school, my teacher read us lots of books, but one of the books that she read when I was in second grade was Little House on the Prairie. And when my teacher read that, was the first time that I realized that anybody can be a writer. You just have to write about yourself, and you can have wonderful stories. And I began at that time writing. That's really when I think I became a writer, was like in second grade. And so Laura Ingalls Wilder is certainly a huge influence in my life. My family, who are all storytellers, huge influence in the storytelling, the oral storytelling, and I think about sitting around the table and hearing the family tell all of their wonderful stories. And I think sometimes children today maybe don't get that experience as much as we probably did, because what else did we have to do but sit around on Sunday afternoons and hear wonderful stories from extended families. So my family certainly. Teachers, my country school teachers who allowed us to write and read all the time. And interestingly enough, a couple of teachers who maybe were influential, perhaps negatively, in the area of writing, which I don't know if a lot of people talk about, the negative influences, but I knew, like I said, in second grade I wanted to be a writer, and my country school teachers were very supportive of that, and my family was very supportive of that. And then we moved to Ponca, and I just knew I was going to be a writer when I grew up. And I had an English teacher who I will not mention. Someday she might watch this, I don't know. But who said to me at one particular point, I remember it very clearly, said, "Nancy, you do not have a creative bone in your body." And I thought, gosh, no one's ever said that to me before, because I obviously thought I was very creative. And then my guidance counselor, also trying to be very helpful, but said to me, you know, people don't make a living writing, Nancy. You really need a real job. You can't go to college just to be a writer. So those two probably negatively influenced my desire to be a writer. So when I went to the university, I actually did not go necessarily in creative writing. I tried journalism for a while and found out that they actually expect you to tell the truth in journalism. That's not really the kind of writing I want to do. I like to embellish my stories like everyone in my family does. I thought that's what it was all about. And then, so I tried business for a while, thinking, you know, I could be a writer and not a starving writer, but that probably wasn't a real good match for me. And then I ended up actually in elementary education, again with the influence of a teacher, because as I was taking all of these two teachers actually, I guess, as I was working supposedly on my business major, but not actually taking any business courses, taking a lot of electives in writing. I had a business professor who said, "You're never going to graduate if you don't start actually taking business classes." And I had a writing instructor who said, "You write really well, but it seems like children's area is your interest, and you really need to know more about children, what they like, what they read." And so I thought, so I immediately changed my major to elementary education. I don't think that's what either one of those professors were saying, but so then I went into teaching, and so, like I said, a lot of teachers negatively and positively through the process. And then, of course, just writers that, both people that I know personally. I have lots of good personal writing friends. And then just other authors besides Laura Ingalls Wilder who mentor me. Eve Bunting, I love her writing. Patricia Polacco, who I think is a storyteller of family stories, which again is sort of what I like to tell. And so, you could just go on with book mentors. But, interestingly enough, I did write all through elementary school. Like I said, I wrote at school, but I also wrote every chance I could at home. One of the things that fascinated me actually about Laura Ingalls Wilder, and again, when I first realized that people could become writers just by telling their own stories, what fascinated me about her was that she wrote in third person. Even though she wasn't making anything up, even though it was her stories, it was all told in third person, like she was making up this entire imaginary world about this little girl named Laura. And I really liked that appeal of doing that. And so I started in second and third grade telling what I call Nancy stories, where I would tell everything that was going on in my life, but it was all in third person about this little girl named Nancy. And so I pretty much did that all through elementary. And then when we moved to Ponca, middle school, high school, those years, not so much. I think middle school and high school years, just by virtue of who and what they are difficult. You're busy in a lot of other things. And for me, that was just a difficult transition. Country school to town school, western Nebraska to eastern Nebraska. Lots of transitions. And then again, Ponca, that's where I ran into the teachers who told me I wasn't really very creative and really can't make a living writing. And so again, probably middle school, high school, not so much. Went to college, actually, again, there I was going to prove to them that I could become a writer. And so I worked very hard, I would say my freshman, sophomore year, doing lots of writing, taking lots of creative writing classes, those kinds of things. When I switched to elementary education, interestingly enough, again, I stopped writing, and I think it's because elementary education, first of all, took care of some of my creative need for that creative outlet, but also you are just really, really busy as a teacher. And then that is during that time that I got married and I became a mom. And one day I woke up and I had been teaching like 5 or 6 years, first grade, had 2 little boys, and I thought, I became a teacher to help my writing, and I have not written anything since I became a teacher. It was just such a, wow, why did that happen? So I actually took a year's leave of absence from teaching so that I could really focus on writing, realized I didn't know anything about writing or how to get published. And that's really when my publishing journey began. I came back as a 3rd grade teacher and tried to write and teach and did that for many, many years. And then actually at 9/11, I recall that very well. I was teaching 2nd grade at the time. After that happened, it was like, what am I doing? I continue to do all these things that actually keep me from writing. And so it was after that year that I quit teaching so that I could really, really concentrate and focus on my writing and school visits and talking about writing. So I guess that answers that. My themes and topics, I thought about this question a long time because I tend to think that, I don't try to write the same story every time, and yet my stories do seem to, they're always very family-oriented. I do think the golden rule is plays through. I know that life isn't fair, but I hope in my stories there is some fairness and some justice at the end. I think children, especially if you're writing for children, there needs to be, if not necessarily a happy ending, a hopeful ending. So I'm very much a believer in the golden rule and treat others as you would have them treat you. So that's one theme that probably comes through. Another theme that comes through, again, that I don't really try to make come through, but it does seem to happen, is my books are often given as gift books. And so they're seen as gift books. Today I'm going fishing with my dad, obviously given a lot for Father's Day, seen as that, you know, a good Father's Day type of book. The Ring Bearer and the Flower Girl, obvious gift books. Though, truthfully, I didn't set out to write a book about a boy who is a ring bearer in a wedding. I just had this humorous story about a boy who thinks he gets to be a bear. And I had people for a long time say to me, you really need a Flower Girl story. And that took a long time to write because I really struggled to find that story because I hadn't set out to write a ring bearer story. I just wrote a book about a boy and his story about experiencing the wedding. And it really wasn't until just a few years ago when my niece got married and my great niece got to be her flower girl and looked at herself in the mirror and knew she was a princess that the Flower Girl story came about. And that's like, okay, now I know what that story is. So gift books, Effys Image, always given as a volunteer book to people who volunteer in school situations. So. And part of that is because I love books. Books are a favorite gift of mine, so I think that shines through settings in schools, setting fishing. So I don't know, again, that I have particular themes that I try to set out, but they come through because that's who I am. The writing time, I write best in short snippets and usually in the morning. And I think part of that comes from having trained myself to do that. When I decided I was going to become a writer and really seriously become a writer, and I was teaching full-time and a mother with little boys, there really was very little time. And I actually read a book by an author who talked about writing and becoming a writer. And one of the things that she suggested was that you get up 15 minutes earlier every day, and that you write for 15 minutes, first thing in the morning. And then you sit down with your calendar and you look at your calendar for the day and you pick another 15 minutes to write during that day and you schedule an appointment. And she suggested that you do that every day, 15 minutes first thing in the morning, then 15 minutes sometime during the day, not always the same time, but make an appointment. And that chapter ended with, if you cannot get up 15 minutes earlier, and you cannot find 15 minutes in your day to write, then just give up. Because your desire not to be a writer is greater than your desire to be a writer, which was an interesting piece of advice. And that, for a long time, I really worked very hard to get up 15 minutes earlier to write, and then find some other 15 minutes. So I have trained myself really to write in 15-minute snippets. When I was teaching third grade, my third graders and I actually wrote every day for 15 minutes. And I would set the timer and all of us would write together. And I just have trained myself to do that. And that still works very well for me. I get up, I set the timer. When the timer goes off, the beauty now, since I am not usually scheduled somewhere else to go, I can continue to write. But I also have that I can stop. I have given myself permission to stop at that time from the actual physical act of writing. So short snippets work best for me. My style probably is I am a children's writer. Obviously my college professor saw that. When I didn't think I was a children's writer, that's what he saw. And I think part of that comes because I started writing as a second and a third grader. When I write, the memories that are clearest to me are really my memories from elementary age. So my first picture books, second, third grade age. Right now I'm starting a series of novels for middle grade students. Again, I'm thinking third through sixth grade. Sixth grade, big transition year for me, and so I'm sort of concentrating on that area and that transition age change for kids, and that's kind of what my middle grade novels focus on, the ones that I'm working on right now. So, children's writer, that's who I am. When I talk to kids about what voice is, and I think voice is a difficult thing for us to understand, what I say is the choices you make show your voice. And I think voice is hard for us to step back and see what our voice is. And the more you write, the more apparent your voice becomes. I choose to write about boys. I'm the mother of 3 boys. I don't set out necessarily to write about boys, but a lot of boys are always characters in my stories. Even if they're not the main character, they're a strong character in my stories. I choose to write about school. It's part of what I know. You know, my stories are always set in Nebraska in my head, even if you can't tell they're set in Nebraska. You know, in my head they are. So I think just the choices I make show my voice. And I think it's very hard for us to recognize our voices, but I'm starting to recognize that I am a writer for that elementary age. What I try to instill in my audience, I do hope, is that even though life isn't always fair, that doesn't mean we can't play fair. And I don't try to teach lessons in my stories, but I do hope that integrity, that my characters are strong characters who do think about others in the choices that they make and in the decisions that they make. When I talk to children, especially about my book, Effys Image, my character Amanda, the book is Effys Image, and a lot of people think it's about Effie, the character Effie, but it's really a story about Amanda. And it is because of Amanda that Effie really discovers her importance in life. And I also say, you know, of all the characters I've written about, Amanda is my favorite because she's so strong and she makes choices I would never make. There's a really beautiful picture in there where she brings Effie the cat, and Effie really hates the cat and kind of yells at Amanda. And I always say to kids, if someone yelled at me for a gift I brought, I would go home and that would be it. I would not go back and visit that person. And Amanda's back the next day with a new idea, something else. And I hope that that's what they see, is that, you know, we can make choices even about the bad things that happen in our life. We still have choices. That doesn't take our choices away, and we just continue to take each day. So. If you want to be a writer, of course, everyone always says, write, 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 and read, 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 and obviously those are important writing skills. But I would also say watch, 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 watch. Observe everything. All of my books and all of my story ideas come from things that I have watched, things that I have noticed. I tell kids, be spies. There's stories hiding everywhere, and it is our job to find those stories. So every good writer that I know is a spy and is very good at observation. And I go back to my first writing mentor, Laura Ingalls Wilder, who obviously was a spy. And you know that from, if you go back and read her books, the details in her books. And what's most incredible is she didn't write those books until she was older, you know, elderly almost. And you think, how did she remember those details so well? Well, obviously, she was spying all of the time. And the other thing that influenced, I think, her writing more than we really realize, but you can see it in her writing, is becoming Mary's eyes. Once Mary became blind and Laura became her eyes, if you go through life describing your world to one person, how incredible you would become at describing a description. And I think we see that very strongly in Laura's writings, and I think that's why her books still appeal to such a wide variety of people. So that is one thing that I would highly suggest, is just be a spy.
This reading series. We're excited that this series has been around for 25 years. We currently obviously hold these Ames reading series Program's on the third Sunday of the month at 2 o'clock, and here you are. Thanks for being here. This is the 188th reading in this series. So, we are here in the Jane Pobgeski Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. It's a special collection that's dedicated to promoting and preserving works by and about Nebraska authors. It is a representative collection. Obviously, if we tried to put everything ever written by a Nebraska author in the room, we wouldn't be able to keep it in this room. There are about 13,000 volumes now, about 3,000 Nebraska authors. We also have information files, magazines, pictures, manuscripts. If you look around the room, you'll see artwork by various authors and other memorabilia too. And by the way, the Heritage Room is not tax supported. It's supported by an endowment that was established through the volunteer efforts of the members of the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. So we'd like to thank the NLHA. We also invite you to come back when we're open. During public service hours, we are open kind of limited hours Tuesday through Friday from 12 to 3 and on Sunday from 2 to 5. And now that we have the program on Sunday afternoons, it is in the middle of our public service hours. So here you are. We also obviously film this series. We have 5 City TV people doing that today. And if you're watching this on 5 City TV later, of course, I just want you to know that we're on the 3rd floor of Bennett Martin Public Library, 14th and N Streets in downtown Lincoln. Today, our reader is Nancy Sharp Wagner, also known as N.L. Sharp, and she'll probably fill you in on that a little bit. She writes for children. She is a Nebraska native. She was born in Valentine and then lived in Ponca and in Lincoln, and she currently lives in Fremont. She has degrees from several degrees from UNL, and I think an endorsement in media from UNO. And I think she finds that her interests lie in writing, among other things, but writing, and specifically in writing for children. Several of her books have been Golden Sower nominees, and several have been honored by the Nebraska Center for the Book. She's written Today I'm Going Fishing with My Dad, The Ring Bear, Effys Image, and she has a newly produced book that combines both The Flower Girl and The Ring Bearer, which I'm sure she'll tell you more about today. We're happy to have Nancy here with us. If you could help me welcome her, I'd appreciate it.
And thank you all for coming. I am N.L. Sharp, and the first thing that I probably want to do is I will be reading Effie's Image and the new book, which is The Ring Bearer, The Flower Girl, the flip book. But what I want to talk about, first of all, is why I write under a pen name. Of all the questions that I get asked about being a writer, that actually is the question I get asked the most, is why do I use a pen name, and why do I use that pen name, which is N.L. Sharp. And what I tell children when I do school visits is the reason that I say my name is N.L. Sharp on the books is because that really is who I think that I am. I was born Nancy Sharp in Valentine, Nebraska, and I decided in 2nd grade that I would be an author when I grew up. I was really fortunate. I attended a one-room country school in Valentine, Nebraska. I was the only one in my class, kindergarten through the 5th grade, and depending on what year it was, there were 10, 12 kids in my whole school. And we had one teacher, kindergarten through 8th grade. And there's probably a lot of things that a teacher who has kindergartners and 8th graders cannot do. But there were 3 things all of us could do. We could all read, we could all write, and we could all listen to stories. And we did a lot of reading and writing and listening to wonderful literature in country school. I will tell you, Today I'm Going Fishing with My Dad was first published. It came out in 1993. It was a Golden Sower nominee in 1995 and 96. The Ring Bear came out in 2003. It was a Nebraska Center for the Book Award winner, I think in about 2004, 2005. Everybody assumes, since they came out 10 years apart, that I wrote them 10 years apart. Of course, that is not true. I wrote both of those books with the help of my 3rd graders. I have had, over the years, many wonderful critique groups, but I will tell you, I have never had a better critique group than my third grade classrooms, because they're very honest and because they knew I wanted to get published. And so I would read my stories, and they would read their stories to me, and I would read my stories to them, and they would tell me what they liked, and they would tell me what they didn't like. And both of those books are things that I wrote with their help. It just took the ring bear a lot longer to find a home than Today I'm Going Fishing with My Dad. So we started studying authors, and what we decided to do to figure out how you become a real author is we started studying authors and reading about authors. And because Laura Ingalls Wilder was sort of the author who first gave me the desire to write, and she was the book I was reading when they thought I should continue that journey, she's kind of the first author that we really spent much time studying. And what we learned is, here are some of the things that we learned from all of our studying of writers. We learned that in order to be a writer, you must write. Now, I know that sounds sort of funny, doesn't it? I tell you, it's one of the hardest things about being a writer is writing every day. Writers write, and they write every day. Now, writers are writers because they write. They're not writers because they're published. It isn't being published that makes you a writer. It is the act of writing that makes you a writer. And so we realized we had to write every day. Now, like I said, I was a mother with 3 little boys, teaching third grade full-time, not a lot of time in the evenings to write. And my third grader said, Mrs. Wagner, if you don't write every day, you're not going to get published. And so we set aside a time every day. We called it Writer's Workshop in my classroom. And everybody, including me, wrote every day for 15 minutes. We just sat down, set the timer, and everybody, including me, wrote for 15 minutes. A lot of times I would write on the overhead so that they could kind of see that when I wrote, I didn't always have the right words, and I made mistakes, and I crossed out, and so they could see that writing first drafts aren't always real pretty, but that's just the way they are. So writers write, and they write every day, and that was really helpful for me to develop that habit of daily writing, which is such an important habit. The other thing that taught both them and me is that you can get a lot of writing done if you only write 15 minutes every day. Sometimes we think that we need huge blocks of time in order to write. And sometimes we choose not to write because we can't find that big block of time to sit down and write. But if you are consistent in your writing, even 15 minutes a day will make a huge difference in what you can do. It's interesting now when I'm not writing and I have, quote unquote, more free time, I find it just as hard to find that 15 minutes as I did when I was working full time with 3 little boys. But we wrote, and we wrote every day. Writers write. The other thing is that writers read, and they read differently than readers do. Readers read for the love of the story. They read, they enjoy the characters, they enjoy the plot, then they're done, and they move on. Writers read, and they say, now why did that author do that? What can I learn from this book? And one of my things that my third graders and I would do, every time we read a book together as a class, we would actually use that as a writing mentor, and we would say, now, what did we learn from this book, and what can we try to do in our writing from that? And again, I'll go back and use Laura Ingalls Wilder because she was our first writing mentor in my class. One of the things that we finished her book, if you think about Laura's books, one of the things that I think makes it very interesting, and one of the reasons perhaps that her books are loved for a really long time, she didn't write about anybody else. She just wrote stories, her life stories, but she wrote them in third person, which is really very interesting if you think about it. It was not I did this and I did that. It was Laura did this and Laura did that. Like she's making up this incredible imaginary world about this little girl. Now, when I first started writing, my own stories. I called them Nancy stories, and I wrote about Nancy did this and Nancy did that, and Nancy's Incredible World, okay? But when I was teaching third grade, we took that idea, we called them Laura stories. And we wrote Laura stories, but we notched it up one more time. What we did is we would take memories, things that really happened to us, and we would write them in third person as if they happened to someone else. And we would change a lot of the details, like perhaps if it was something that happened to me and I'm a girl, I could make the main character a boy. Or it might be something that happened to me when I was 10, but I would change the main character to be 3 or 4 or 15 or whatever, to see how does that affect what you write and how you write it. And the example that I always give to kids when I do school visits and we talk about what I call the Laura stories, which are basically is just realistic fiction, taking something that really happened and then twisting the details to create a good story. I give them the example of a dog. Let's say you go home, you're 10 years old, you go home after school and you find out that your neighbor has a new puppy. What a gorgeous puppy, and you love that puppy, and it comes up and it lips your face, and you're just loving that puppy, and it nips you on the hand. And you're annoyed, and you get out of here. And you might even run home and be upset. But the very next day you're back playing with that dog, you've forgotten all about the nip on your hand. If you're 15 and it nips on your hand, you're like, oh, yes, it's just the cutest little thing. You don't even notice the nip on your hand. But if you're 3 and it nips your hand, it is an entirely different experience. And it could change the life of a 3-year-old. Same incident would not affect a 10-year-old, would not affect a 15-year-old. Change a 3-year-old's life forever. And those are what we would call Laura stories. So every time we read, we would ask ourselves, what did this author do and why did they do that? Writers read, but they read differently than readers read. They read and say, why and what can I learn? So writers write, writers read, and then writers share their writing with other writers. Writers belong to a critique group, whether it was my group of third graders. I'm not teaching right now, but I do belong to a multitude of critique groups. I have a group in Fremont, and we're really more a craft group, I would say, than a critique group. We get together once or twice a month. We have a lesson. We talk about what makes good writing. We always write and then share our writing with each other. And that's really about craft, helping us each get better. I'm working on novels for the very first time for middle grade, 3rd through 6th grade readers. So I have a novelist group that meets in Omaha, and we get together and share our novels. I'm a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and they have a group that meets actually in Lincoln and a group that meets in Omaha. And one meets the second Saturday and one meets the third Saturday, and I tend to meet with both of them on both of those Saturdays. So writers share their writing with other writers, and through that process they grow. So all of my books come from something that have really happened. Today I'm going fishing with my dad. It's about a little boy who hates to go fishing, and I got that idea when I took my son Scott fishing for the very first time. So again, it's sort of a Laura story. I was observing my son Scott when we took him fishing for the very first time, and then I remembered when I went fishing for the very first time. I grew up in Valentine, Nebraska. My dad and my granddad both worked for the state of Nebraska. They worked at the state fish hatchery in Valentine, so I grew up around a lot of fishing people. Then we moved to Ponca State Park. My dad was the assistant superintendent there. A lot of fishing people in Ponca, Nebraska. I live in Fremont now, all of the lakes, lots of fishing people at the state lakes. So fishing has sort of been one of those things that I've been exposed to all my life. Not ever something I really liked doing. So I wrote a kid. I thought about Scott not liking fishing. I didn't really like to go fishing, and I wrote a book about a kid that hates to go fishing. The core of the idea was true, but the details are all made up. As I would read that story to my third graders, every third grader had a fishing story. Oh, Mrs. Wagner, this is what happened when I went fishing. Oh, Mrs. Wagner, this is what happened when I went fishing. And some of those details ended up in the book. That's how stories go from being true kernels to true stories, fun details. The second book, The Ring Bear, everyone assumes, because I have 3 boys and because my first book is about my son Scott, that I got the idea for The Ring Bear from my son Scott. It's not true. I got that by observing, by being a spy, which is one of the skills that every good writer needs. You need to be a good spy. I think Laura Ingalls, again, is proof of that. She wrote those stories when she was quite elderly, but those stories have details that are just incredible about her life as a girl. You know, she was spying all the time, watching everything, listening to everything. So one day I was at a baseball game, spying on 2 moms who were sitting right in front of me. And one of the moms said that when her son got asked to be the bear in a ring bear in a wedding, he did think he was going to get to be a bear and wear a bear suit. And they laughed and I laughed, but I thought, I just spied a story. One of the things that my 3rd graders and I learned, even though we wrote every day for 15 minutes, your best ideas for stories will never come during that 15 minutes that you're writing. They will come when you are, sitting at a baseball game in the middle of the summer. So my 3rd graders and I carried with us everywhere notebooks. And I still carry to this day a notebook in my purse. And when I come up with an idea that I think might make a good story, I write, and we'll see if I have one in here. I do. I write SI, it stands for story idea. And I just jot that idea down, and then I put it back in my purse, and then I go on. And every once in a while, I clean out that notebook and throw it in a big SI folder for story ideas. And some of those become books, and some of them become details in books, and some of them just get lost. One day I was going through that folder and I saw a boy thinks he's a bear in a wedding. And I thought, I'm going to write that book. And so I wrote The Ring Bear. After I wrote that book, for many years, people said, you need a flower girl story. It was interesting. I couldn't find a flower girl. That wasn't my idea. I didn't really have a good idea. And so I didn't write that story for a long time. And just a few years ago, my niece got married. And my great niece got to be her flower girl. And she put on her dress, and she said, I'm a princess. And there was my story, and you'll see that when I read The Flower Girl. And I knew the minute I saw her princess, I knew that there was my story, and I was able to write a Flower Girl story, and that book has been created as a flip book, those 2 books together. The final story, the first one that I'll read, though, Effys Image, again comes from observing. When I taught 1st grade, I had a lady whose name was Hazel who came to my classroom every day. And Hazel volunteered in my classroom, and my kids loved Hazel, and Hazel loved those kids. And I spied Hazel, and I spied on my kids, and I thought, I'm going to write a book about someone who volunteers their time and their talents at school. This is called Effys Image. The morning Effie Armstrong turned 82 years old, she pushed herself out of bed. She picked up a framed photograph and traced the image with her finger. Effie, she said, you're as lovely as ever. But when she stared at herself in the mirror, she knew it wasn't true. Her hair was no longer black and curly. Her skin was no longer silky and smooth, and her stooped back could not hold her body straight. Those days are gone, Effie said, and Effie took herself back to bed. Effie moped around her house for so long that friends and neighbors began to worry. And then one day there was a knock at the door. Amanda James, what brings you here so early in the morning, Effie asked. I brought Boots over to keep you company while I'm at school. Before Effie could say a word, the kitten jumped out of Amanda's arms. He disappeared under the sofa, and Amanda disappeared out the door. At 3 o'clock, Amanda was back. Did you and Boots have a good time? She asked. No, we did not, Effie said. He has scratched my piano. He has tangled my tatting. He has even helped himself to my bowl of ice cream. That cat is nothing but a nuisance. Please take him home now. My dad needs some help down at the church, Amanda said the next time she came to visit. I told him you would be perfect. So Effie put on her walking shoes and headed for the church. She scooted around in the soft blue rolling chair. She swapped recipes with the janitor. She watered the plants and shared secrets with the mailman. But then things started to go wrong. The copy machine jammed. The computer would not turn on, and the telephone with 10 buttons rang and rang. This job is not for me, said Effie. I'm going home. Maybe you should go to school, said Amanda. School, said Effie. Now, why would I want to go to school? Because it's fun. You get to read and write and draw pictures. You can even eat there. Imagine that, Effie muttered. An old lady like me at school. Who ever heard of such a crazy idea? But the more she thought about it, the more she liked it. So the next morning, dressed in her best sweater and her fanciest tatted necklace, Effie met Amanda at the corner and walked with her to school. After stopping in the office to say good morning, they headed for Amanda's classroom. Welcome, Effie, said Miss Carter. I hope you don't mind if I put you to work. Of course not, said Effie. That's why I'm here. Effie went to work immediately. She listened to stories. She played math games. She admired wiggly teeth, and she tied shoelaces. Before she knew it, it was time for lunch. What's that I smell? Effie asked. Chicken soup and cinnamon rolls, Amanda said. Good, said Effie. I'm starved. Effie was on her second cinnamon roll when the third grade teacher saw her. She asked Effie to stay and listen to the stories that her students had written. And just as Effie and Amanda were leaving, the fifth grade teacher caught her. He invited Effie back the next day to watch a video that his students had made. Imagine that, Effie said. Fifth graders are making movies. Well, I'll definitely be here for that. And she was. In fact, Effie walked to school with Amanda every day that week. Soon 1 week became 2 weeks, and 2 weeks became a month. Some days she went home at noon, and some days she stayed the whole day. She played the piano. She taught the teachers how to tat, and she showed the students how to make homemade ice cream. They taught her how to run a copy machine, turn on a computer, and answer a telephone with 10 buttons. Before long, no one could remember a time when Effie wasn't a regular part of every school day. One day in May, the principal called everyone to the gym. What's going on? Effie asked the cooks as she passed them in the hall. This sounds important. It is. You don't want to miss this. When all the students were seated on the floor, the principal began to speak. This year, a new friend has joined our school community. She's not a student or a teacher, but every day she's here, helping every way she can. Effie Armstrong, would you please come forward? Effie looked around. Everyone was smiling. Amanda grabbed her hand. Come on, she whispered, they're waiting for you. Together they walked to the front of the room. The principal handed a wrapped package to Amanda. Amanda, in turn, handed the package to Effie. This is for you, she said, because you make every day a great day at school. Effie opened the present, and she took out a framed photograph. In the picture, she was reading a book to the students in Miss Carter's classroom. Her back was softly bowed, her cheeks were wrinkled, and her gray hair was falling out of its bun. Effie traced the image with her finger. Effie, she thought, you're as lovely as ever. And when she stared at the sea of faces smiling back at her, she knew that it was true. A couple special notes about that book, just fun things to know. When I write, I use photographs. Like I said, I write from memories. That's really one of the ways that I get most of my ideas. I use a lot of photographs and pictures to write. Currently, I'm working on a couple of mid-grade novels. And one of them, the first one, is about a girl that's a barrel racer. And when I was growing up in Valentine, Nebraska, we rodeoed. I did it very poorly, but I had a couple of sisters who actually did pretty well. And I have actually two pictures. I have a picture of my oldest sister, Charlotte's barrel racing, and then a picture of my sister, Corliss, actually hangs on my mom and dad's wall because she was participating in the professional rodeo in Ponca, and they took a picture of her and it appeared on the front page of the paper. And so, my parents proudly have that displayed on their wall. And so I have used that picture actually in a scene in my novel about the girl who's a barrel racer. And so I use a lot of pictures when I write as inspiration. And with the book Effys Image, I had the opportunity to work with the illustrator. Now, most of the time when you get a picture book published, you do not get an opportunity to meet with the illustrator. Today I'm going fishing with my dad. I sent that book out. Chris Demarest was selected as the illustrator. I wasn't very familiar with him. I went and looked up, so I went to the library, looked up for all of Chris Demarest's books. He was a cartoon illustrator. I found a book called No Peas for Nellie that he had done, and I just knew that's how my book was going to look. All these beautiful cartoon illustrations. And then, of course, when the book came out, it wasn't cartoons at all, which was quite a shock. And I found out that he was tired of being a cartoon illustrator, and all of the books that they sent him were designed for cartoons. Some of the books that he had done for my publisher, The Cows Are Going to Paris, these cows all dress up and ride the train to Paris, it was a cartoon book. Smart Dog, about this dog who can play the piano and talk and write and do all these things, again, a cartoon book. So when my book came across, that was the first manuscript that he'd been sent that he felt gave him an opportunity to do something other than cartoons. And it's sort of an interesting story. He said to him, I'd like to do something else. It's funny, but I don't think it's really a cartoon story. And my publisher said, well, we do. So we want cartoons. So he did 2 sets of illustrations. He did the whole book in cartoons, and I have those pencil sketches. And then he did it in the way that he saw the book. And then after they saw both, they chose to have it be done, not in cartoons. And that book has done very well. Like I said, it came out in 2003. It is still available in paperback. And I often wonder if it were cartoons, if that would be true. You don't know. But that was my first experience. And so I had not really worked with illustrators before. And then I did work with Michael on The Ring Bear, which was a new experience. And then Dorothea, when she was doing Effys Image, like I said, I write from illustrations. But one of the things she was doing, I went over and she was showing me some sketches, and she had this sketch of Effie. And I said, so this is what Effie looks like. And she said, oh, I have no idea what Effie looks like. So this is what Effie is doing. We have to find Effie. Now, she had already found Amanda. Amanda is her next door neighbor, and the book is dedicated, acknowledged, there's a school that her next door neighbor went to school with, and a lot of the kids' pictures are actually in the book. The little girl's teacher is the real teacher in first grade. So she had all of the models for the kids and things that she needed. The minister at the church was actually the minister at her local church. So she had everybody but Effie. I don't have Effie. And so we started looking, for Effie, and we found her. Actually, a lovely lady that lives up in Newcastle, Nebraska, was the model for Effie. And I thought that very interesting because our write from pictures and illustrations. It never occurred to me that illustrators also draw completely, and when you look at the photographs, and she actually went and spent a whole day with a photo shoot, and everything she had Effie doing, she had Helen Marie do, and so she's got a photograph of Helen Marie sitting on the floor, and then Helen Marie pouring the tea, and all of the illustrations that are in there, she has a photograph to match every one of those illustrations, and she drew each illustration from that. Just an incredible thing. So that was fun and a great learning experience for me. A few other things. She has 2 boys, Caleb and Winston, and if you look very carefully in every illustration, she hid a C and a W for Caleb and Winston. So that's another little secret that not most people know about that book. Like I said, The Ring Bear came out many, many years ago, and when we decided that, when I had the Flower Girl story, and we decided that that was going to be the next book, Michael, who is the illustrator for The Ring Bear, we actually contacted him to see if he would be interested in doing the Flower Girl story, and he would also have to redo some of the Ring Bear illustrations because we were going to make it into a flip book. And Michael initially agreed, and then his schedule, it just did not work out, that he could not do the illustration. So unfortunately, he did not get to illustrate this book. Instead, the illustrator is from Omaha. His name is Tim Hantla. But I also think it's kind of fascinating to see 2 different people's vision of one book. One of the joys of being a picture book author that I don't think any other writer gets this joy is that I get to see the pictures created in at least one reader's head. As a writer, my job, I get a picture in my head of my story. And then when I write it, my job is to create the picture in your head as a reader. And as a picture book author, I actually get to see what picture I created in at least one reader's head, my illustrator's head. And I'm always amazed at things that they put in their illustration that I never would have put, didn't even know that was a choice. So that's always fun. And this is fun. You'll actually get to see 2 different versions. I'm going to read The Ring Bear first, since that came out first. And then I'll read The Flower Girl and hopefully have time to read both of them. Robert loved bears. He loved real bears and stuffed bears and bears in books. He loved black bears and brown bears and polar bears. He even loved to eat bears, graham cracker bears and cinnamon bears and chocolate bears. So he wasn't surprised when his mom said he was going to be the ring bear in his Aunt Jane's wedding. "What does a ring bear do?" Robert asked. "You carry the pillow that holds the rings," Mom said. "What happens if I drop it?" Once he was carrying his plate to the sink. It dropped and peas rolled all over the kitchen floor. "Don't worry," Mom said. "The rings will be tied on tight. Even if you drop the pillow, you won't lose the rings." "Well, what does a ring bear wear?" Robert asked. "A suit," Mom said, "a black suit with a tail, a white shirt, and a red bow tie." Robert smiled. "I'll look just like a panda bear," he thought. This was going to be fun. Robert wanted to be the best ring bear he could, so he practiced every day. He growled at the dog. He ate berries, which were really grapes, and he drank honey, which was really apple juice. And he crawled around the house with his pillow on his back, trying to keep his glow-in-the-dark ring from falling on the floor. Finally, there was only one day left before the wedding. "Robert, it's time for the rehearsal," Mom said. "Rehearsal? What's that?" "The rehearsal is like a play. We're going to practice our parts for the wedding, so tomorrow we'll know just what to do." "I've been practicing," Robert said, "every day." "Good," Mom said. "I'm proud of you, but tonight Aunt Jane wants everyone to practice together." Robert looked at his clothes. "Where's my suit?" he asked. "Here it is." Mom took a bag out of the closet. The black suit did not look like a bear suit to Robert. Instead, it looked like something his dad wore. when he went to a fancy party. Are you sure this is what I'm supposed to wear, he asked. Yes, Mom said. Where's the tail? Mom pointed to a long flap on the back of the jacket. Robert looked at the flap, and then he looked at his bears. Maybe I'm supposed to be a dancing bear, he thought, like in the circus. Take it off, Mom said. We don't want to get it dirty before tomorrow. She hung the suit back in the closet. Soon it was time to go. Robert wondered where the wedding would be. Would it be in his grandmother's backyard? Maybe it was in the park or at the zoo. But the car did not go to any of those places. Instead, his dad drove straight to a church. What are we doing here? Robert asked. Is this where the wedding will be? Yes, said Mom. Didn't you know? No, said Robert. How can I be a bear if the wedding is in a church? You're not going to be a bear, Mom said. You're going to be a ring bearer. You mean I don't get to wear a bear suit? And growl? And carry the pillow on my back? No, that would be silly. People don't have bears in their weddings. They have ring bearers. Robert stomped his foot. No, he said. I want to be a bear. If I can't be a bear, I'm not going to be in the wedding. You have to be in the wedding, Dad said. Aunt Jane needs you. She can't get married without those rings. Someone else can carry them, Robert said. I don't want someone else, Aunt Jane said. I want you. Robert sat down on the curb. He thought about how much fun it had been practicing to be a bear. Then he thought how sad Aunt Jane looked when he said he wasn't going to be in her wedding. Is it true you can't get married without those rings, he asked. Yes, Robert, it is, Aunt Jane said. And do you really want me to be the one to carry them? Yes, I do. It wouldn't be the same without you. Robert growled. All right, he said. I'll do it. The next day, Robert wore his black suit with its long tail, white shirt, and red bow tie. He carried the pillow down the aisle and held the rings until the minister needed them. And everyone agreed he was the best ring bearer they had ever seen. Later, at the reception, he growled at the flower girl. He ate berries, which were really mints, and he drank honey, which was really punch. And he crawled around with his pillow on his back, trying to keep the ring pop, which his new Uncle Dan had given him, from falling on the floor. And everyone agreed he was the best ring bear they had ever seen, too. Thank you. Thank you. So that's Robert's story. And now, of course, we have little Miss Sophie, who was the flower girl. And this one is much thanks to my dear niece and great niece, because I just couldn't. You know, for a long time, when I came up with the idea for Robert, it was the humor of a boy who thought he was going to be a bear. That was the story. It wasn't so much about the wedding. And so to come up with a flower girl story, it was like, well, you know, a girl who thinks she's a flower in the wedding, that's just not going to happen. So I really struggled for a long time. I even did some research into flower girls. I thought maybe I would do a story based on how did the flower girl even come about, that idea, that tradition, and none of that really seemed to work until my niece's wedding. Sophie loved flowers. She loved real flowers and fake flowers and flowers in fields. She loved pink flowers and purple flowers and yellow flowers. She even loved to eat flowers. Candy flowers and cookie flowers and cauliflowers. So she wasn't surprised when her mom said she was going to be the flower girl in her Uncle Dan's wedding. "What does a flower girl do?" Sophie asked. "You walk down the aisle carrying a basket of rose petals," Mom said. "What happens if I drop it?" Once, she was carrying a bowl of water for her cat Max. It tipped and water splashed all over the laundry room floor. "Don't worry," Mom said. "You're supposed to drop the petals. That way the bride will have a path to follow as she walks down the aisle." "Do I have to wear a flower costume?" Sophie asked. "No, you'll wear a dress," Mom said, "a sparkly white dress with lace and beads and flowers in your hair." Sophie smiled. "I'll look just like a princess," she thought. This was going to be fun. Sophie wanted to be the best flower girl she could, so she practiced every day. She curtsied to her mom. She danced with her dad. And she marched around the garden with a bowl of cereal, sprinkling it on the grass so that Max would have a path to follow. Finally, there was only one day left before the wedding. "Sophie, it's time to go to the church," Dad said. "Why are we going there?" Sophie asked. "We're going to practice our parts for the wedding, so tomorrow we'll know just what to do." "I've been practicing," Sophie said, "every day." "Good," Dad said. "I'm proud of you, but tonight Uncle Dan wants everyone to practice together." Sophie looked at her clothes. "Where's my dress?" she asked. "Here it is." Mom took a box out of the closet. She helped Sophie slip the dress over her head. Sophie stared at herself in the mirror. "Do I really get to wear this?" she asked. "Yes," Mom said. "Where's my crown?" Sophie asked. "Here." Mom placed a wreath of flowers on her head. Sophie twirled around in front of the mirror. "Look at me," Sophie said. "I'm a princess, a beautiful flower princess." "Take it off," Mom said. "We don't want to get it dirty before tomorrow." She hung the dress back in the closet. Soon it was time to go. Sophie was so excited she could hardly sit still while they drove down the street. And when Dad stopped the car, Sophie could not believe her eyes. The church looked just like a castle. There was a boy standing in front of the church. "This is Robert," Mom said. "You're going to walk down the aisle with him." "Are you my prince?" Sophie asked. "I'm no prince," said Robert. "I'm the ring bearer." "A bear?" Sophie asked. "I have to walk down the aisle with a bear?" "Yes," said Dad. "Didn't you know?" "No," said Sophie. "How can I be a princess if I'm walking with a bear?" "You're not going to be a princess," Dad said. "You're going to be the flower girl." Sophie shook her head. "No," she said, "I won't. I want to be a princess. If I can't be a princess, I'm not going to be in the wedding." "You have to be in the wedding," Mom said. "Uncle Dan is counting on you." "Someone else can drop the petals," Sophie said. "I don't want someone else," Uncle Dan said. "I want you." Sophie sat down on the curb. She thought about how much fun it had been practicing to be a princess. Then she thought about how sad Uncle Dan looked when she said she wasn't going to be in the wedding. "Is it true you need someone to make a path for the bride to follow?" "Yes, Sophie, it is," Uncle Dan said. "And do you really want me to be the one to do it?" "Yes," he said, "it wouldn't be the same without you." Sophie curtsied. "All right," she said, "I'll do it." The next day, Sophie wore her long white dress with a wreath of flowers in her hair. She walked down the aisle dropping petals for the bride to follow, and everyone agreed she was the best flower girl they had ever seen. Later at the reception, she curtsied to her mom. She danced with her dad. And she marched around the tables with a bowl of confetti, sprinkling it on the floor so that Robert, her ring bearer prince, would have a path to follow. And everyone agreed she was the best flower princess they had ever seen, too. Thank you. And thank you all so much for coming and having me here at the Heritage Room. It has been just an honor and a joy to read for you today. So thank you.